to share your experience and moments of inspiration on social media.
Alrighty, hello everyone. Welcome to day 4 of Denver Startup Week. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Ryan Margolis. I'm one of the co-chairs of the product track and a member of the Denver Startup Week organizing committee. So before we get started, I just want to thank everybody for joining us. This is the first ever virtual Denver Startup Week. Been a few kinks along the way, but we're making it happen. Thank you all for your patience. Thank you for being a part of it. If 2020 has taught us anything, it's that we're more powerful when we come together as a community to share ideas and help make each other better. So Denver Startup Week, we strive to make all of our sessions a space where attendees can connect, learn, and grow, regardless of age, gender identity, gender expression, race, ability, sexual orientation, or the combination of any of those. There is something for everyone at Denver Startup Week. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being a part of it. And thank you to our sponsors. We saw a bunch come through on Ben's video there, and then for Capital One. Capital One Cafe is the sponsor of Product Track. They're the reason that all of this is free. Denver Startup Week is the largest free startup focused event in the world. How cool is that? So shout out to our sponsors. Thank you so much. This session is the Internet of Things, past, present, and future. I'm excited to turn it over to Ryan Lawler. He's going to lead the charge here. Last thing of note from me, if you have questions along the way for the panel, please use the Q&A tool. If you're not familiar with it, it's probably on the bottom of your screen in the Zoom ribbon. You can ask questions of the panel and they'll get to them at the end. You're also welcome to use the chat, but that Q&A function makes things easier for the panel to track. So without further ado, Ryan, join us and then y'all are on your way. We might have just lost Ryan. Did we just lose Ryan, team?
Looks like it.
All right. Well, please bear with us for a second. Looks like maybe Ryan's trying to jump back on. As a fellow Ryan, I wish I could just jump in and get y'all going, but it doesn't seem like that's the case.
Well, perhaps as a suggestion, since not sure how long it might take him to, we should just kick off and do some quick introductions of the panelists. So why don't we get started on that? Happy to go first. So Jerri Levison. So I'm a director of IoT sales and engineering services for Aero Electronics. My team and I consult with a wide variety of customers on both their IoT and digital transformation journey. And we do that by dialing in things like engineering services coupled with our large ecosystem of suppliers and partners to pretty much help solve for any type of solution, problem, and or opportunity that those customers are looking for. So that's me. Maybe turn it over to Melissa. Go next.
Sure, thanks, Jerri. I'm Melissa Stenger. My role is with Allegion PLC. I'm the director of IoT services. Allegion is a physical security and safety company, publicly traded organization. The headquarters based out of Indianapolis, Indiana, with offices all over the world globally. My role is around our connected product strategy. So we are a mechanical hardware company where we grew up with making doorknobs. We're a house of brands. You may be familiar with Schlage. My role is to ensure that we're picking the right technologies and meeting customer needs with the IoT side. And I'll give it to Sharon.
Hi, thanks, Melissa. Hi, everybody. I'm Sharon, Allpress. And I work for DCP Midstream. I'm in the Tech Ventures group. Previous to this role in Ventures, I was working on some advanced analytics products for DCP Midstream. And now I'm in Ventures, and we're scanning the landscape, looking for emerging technology for not only our company, but also the industry. DCP Midstream is a natural gas company. We gather and process natural gas from the wellhead and then take it to the commodity markets. So I'll hand it over to Emily now.
Hi, I'm Emily Silverman. I am currently with Parsons, which is a company that specializes in engineering, technology, and defense. I've been here for a little over a year. I'm in the Intelligent Transportation Systems group, which deals with technology in the field, focused on transportation. Before that, I was at the City and County of Denver for about 8 years, and I'm excited to be a part of this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Emily, and thank you, the panel. My name's Ryan Lawler, and I'm a part of IIOT Colorado, which is a small little meetup group. We started about maybe 8 years ago or so, and I just became a part of it about 2 years ago in planning and organizing all things IoT here in Colorado. We act as a resource for the community itself, and really excited to be here today. Forgive me, my internet is a little bit spotty today, so I'm gonna have to work through that a little bit. But first off, panelists, thank you for doing this today, and Ryan and the rest of the team over at Denver Startup Week and all the volunteers there. I know it's a lot of work to put all of this together, so just want to say thank you to the community there. Let's jump in a little bit here. Jerri, I think, the topic here is kind of past, present, and the future of IoT. And, I think when you think about the past and kind of what you've done, at Aero Technologies and then also kind of in your career, what really got you kind of interested in IoT in general? And can you talk a little bit about maybe some of those kind of first projects that you are working on there?
Sure. I'd be happy to. So basically my background, my career, I spent a fair amount of time on the network engineering side of the house. So really understanding intimately all of the details associated with both wired and wireless types of protocols and how things are connected to them. So it wasn't that big of a leap to go from understanding the network side of the house and then applying that to connecting up things. And boy, when you look at some of the things that folks wanted to connect up, it was pretty fascinating. So it was a pretty natural extension to go from network engineering into IoT and look at connecting up those things on both sides of an internet connection as such. One of my early projects here at Aero was actually working on a smart building application. So we were basically connecting up sensors to large ingress and egress water pipes coming into a building, monitoring for things like leak flow and usage, together with monitoring energy inside of a circuit panel. And I can tell you, we sure learned a lot, Ryan, just on how often to collect data, how you aggregate that data, what are the insights you're getting out of that data, what are the actionable things you need to do. And so it was definitely a pretty fantastic journey doing that very first project.
No, thank you for that. Emily, this kind of maybe leads into a little bit of your background too. And I think it's kind of a good segue into, what you did at the City of Denver and helping them set up smart programs, and now what you're doing at Parsons as well, around smart city and smart transportation and those types of initiatives around IoT in general. Can you talk a little bit about kind of what you're working on and kind of some of the experience that you've had in the past there as well?
Yeah, so at the City and County of Denver, one of the advantages that the city has, which some public sector entities have, but others don't, is that we as a city, I currently live here in Denver as well, have a fiber network that is over 300 miles of fiber. And it really was built for signals. So it is, for those of you who are really technical, it's a hub and spoke model, which means that as we all know, when we drive around, a signal, you want it to work, but if it doesn't, it always has a backup plan, which is that flashing that we see. There is both an opportunity when we think about smart cities out in the transportation field to build upon that fiber network, to understand what we can do with all of the sensors and how they come in and give intelligence really around this transformation around situational awareness. The idea of situational awareness is the more information that we have about the world around us, the better that we can make decisions. However, we need to make sure that those underlying networks really have more fail-safes than just flashing into red. Because, for example, if I'm taking my 6-year-old daughter, Solia, across the street, I want the infrastructure and the signals to be really smart. And if she gets out of my hands and runs into the middle of the street, I want the cars to know that she's there. Now, whether the cars have a driver that is there making decisions or whether the car itself is making decisions, I want as much information given to the drivers as possible, because I think we can all agree that no one wants to hurt anyone. And so the more that we can go from situational awareness to situational management is going to be really important. And in the private sector at Parsons, what we do is we take all of that information. My group has a platform where we've been working on it for the last 20 years. So although there's a lot of newer players in this space, we've been driving and getting intelligence from technology in the field for years. And the idea is we bring it all under the same roof for operators who are looking at a traffic management center to emergency vehicles and others, all being coordinated from a system of systems approach.
Wonderful. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense there, Emily, and thank you for that insight. Sharon, you know, being in oil and gas and kind of, you know, moving fluid, so to speak, all across the country, right? You know, you've been kind of dealing in this sensors kind of business and being able to monitor those miles and miles of pipeline that you kind of oversee. You know, how have things changed from, you know, pre kind of wireless communication and having to have things wired, and how have those types of things kind of changed, and what other types of insights and improvements has that led to within your organization?
Yeah, that's a great question. So just to give you a landscape of DCP Midstream, you know, as a natural gas company, we have about 41,000 miles of pipeline. We have 42 gas processing plants and about 400 to 500 compressor stations along those pipelines. And we're split out, we run operations in 5 states. So, you know, trying to manage operations. So we're moving fluids. So if you have an upset condition anywhere in your footprint, that means that, you know, you're not moving that gas, and it's very difficult to make up and kind of speed up, I think of it as the assembly line. So keeping all of our equipment up and running at all times is highly critical for our business. Historically, so we have a very rich set of sensors out there. It's landline, you know, sensors, the old SCADA systems, which still works great. We have DCS in the plants, all hooked into a PLC, and it comes into our data center. And we've built some just amazing advanced analytic platforms that help us monitor the health of all of our assets in the field. And it's really helped us improve our operations, but even to the next step, and we didn't even realize it, when COVID happened, we could all go home and we were all running out of our homes and everybody could monitor what was going on across our footprint. So that was a huge in that side of it. We have about 500,000 sensors today out in the field, and it's collecting data, bringing data in around every 30 seconds to every 2 or 3 minutes. We bring in about 7 billion data points per day that we have to kind of make sense of. So we built this analytics dashboard. It's our bread and butter of our operations. But now we're at the stage of saying, okay, let's get into some predictive maintenance, and then let's get into some prescriptive, machine learning. And what we're finding is the sensors that we have, we can certainly use them. It has a high enough frequency for what we're looking at right now, but we need to augment that. And so we need to put in a number of other sensors of what we've found at lower levels, right? So we can tell whether our compressor stations are running, not running, if the pressure is high or low, if the temperature is high and low, what the flow is. And to get to the next level of machine learning and analytics, we really need to look at the rotating equipment. So all the individual pieces of equipment, and then bring that all together into a holistic picture of what the health is of certain components of the machinery. So we're doing a lot of work right now, just assessing the sensor landscape, the IoT landscape, and trying to find the best of breed for each of our use cases that we have.
Sounds like a lot of data.
It's a lot of
tons
data.
and tons and tons of data. So super, super interesting. I think I just kind of take a little bit of a break here and just do a little house cleanup. If any of the attendees out there have questions, feel free to kind of go to the bottom of your screen in the Q&A section, and we'll try to answer some of these on the fly and live as well. But to jump back in, Melissa, being at a security company at its core, right, at Schlage, and talking about kind of the evolving product in the lock space and in the security space, I'd love to kind of hear a little bit of like how that's kind of changed from your typical kind of RFID company to now transitioning into mobile applications that are being connected to your door that you can open on a whim, so to speak.
Yeah, so happy to talk about that. So our business functions in two sort of major segments. One is sort of on the commercial side, where you think about commercial office, retail, et cetera, but also on the residential side from a connected product standpoint. And both of those have made big moves towards the mobile side and away from kind of this RFID. Maybe I'll talk a little bit more about the commercial side, because I think that's maybe having more of an impact, but the res side's really interesting too, because it's personally, it hits all of us. But in the commercial side, traditionally, 5 to 10 years ago, the way that access control systems or physical access control systems were installed is you had a reader that hung on the door with a lot of cabling back to this major panel in the facility closet or the maintenance closet, and then there was a big server with big software that was installed on top of it or on it, and that's how you ran your security within your building, really heavy. And as the access control and physical security space is migrated, it's more IP-based devices, it's more cloud-based software, and those devices are getting smarter at the edge with more data on them. And then the next big progression is really onto the mobile side, where people are traditionally used to either putting in a keypad number on their reader with RFID, or using a piece of plastic where you have to find it in your wallet. Hopefully you didn't lose it, or you have to wear it on your belt. And as commercial spaces are looking at how do we make the ease of use more seamless from facility to facility, the mobile device is really becoming the credential and sort of the identity for each person. You always have your phone, you're not going to lose it. And there's a big play in this space around who's going to own identity. How do you get that identity to that device, and how do these new partnerships start to come into the market as new devices and new technology play? So BLE has been really the communication path that started sort of this mobile credentialing era. But NFC is starting to make a big play as Apple starts to open that up. And first, they've started to really open it up in the student ID space in college campuses. So that's sort of the evolution. It's going to be really exciting to see how it continues to progress. We launched our Schlage mobile credential in the fall of last year. What year is it? Yes. In the fall of last year, with good adoption, and it's going to continue, and big improvements in that over time. Similar on the residential side, where we've got a fully connected Wi-Fi lock, where I can see on my phone, so-and-so went in the door, You know, your dog walker's here, I can grant access from my phone, and it's all based on the mobile side, which has been really awesome in the last couple of months too.
I'll second that. I lose my phone all the time, so I'm in big trouble with you. So, you know, going back to Jerri, you know, I always love kind of hearing, you know, about projects that you're working on at Aero Electronics, because you're working with partners all across the globe and working on, you know, frontline kind of super innovative stuff. And can you kind of dive into, you know, maybe some of the interesting projects that you're currently working on, and, you know, maybe some of the challenges that you're running into and didn't think of initially when you were going into those projects, and kind of how you've been able to troubleshoot and make them work for maybe some of those specific clients of yours?
Yeah, sure. So I think some of the interesting ones that we're working on right now are what I would classify as kind of telehealth, if you will. Basically, we have a project that we're working on where we're putting different sensors into nursing homes or care facilities that would then be able to monitor events that would take place and then notify somebody, hey, there's something you need to go pay attention to. And so that's been pretty fascinating relative to just the technology that needs to go into these types of sensors in order to detect a specific event, to call attention to something that might have happened. Some of the challenges with that is this is a project that was really kicked off right pre-COVID times. And during COVID, where you can't go into these facilities, boy, it kind of, the whole field trial proof of concept phase relative to this project kind of got put on hold with, hey, you can't actually go into these facilities right now. We're starting to get seeing a little bit of that lightening up where we can actually go in for a very short, limited amount of time and see if those field trials are actually going quite well. But COVID's definitely kind of thrown a wrench relative to some of the timing for those kind of telehealth type of solutions. Other ones are from, smart water metering solutions in order to connect up something to your house, to give a utility company information pertaining to, might there be a leak before it gets to your house or a leak within your house? So that's another interesting, all the way to, there's a lot on smart fitness and or wearables. Again, you look at the COVID times when people can't go into a gym or a facility, you know, there's a big, you know, a lot of projects that are creeping up relative to, hey, we want to put sensors into different things so that as somebody's doing a type of workout, they can get feedback as to how they're doing. So those are kind of on the funner side. But yeah, definitely challenges, I think, on some of the telehealth types of projects as such.
Yeah, I think that's, you know, moving forward, it's going to be quite challenging. You know, anytime you're dealing with data that is secure and needs to be secure, you know, I think that's one of the biggest challenges for IoT right now. And in fact, there's a question from the attendees. You know, on the consumer side, how concerned should we be about having a $5 smart plug connected to our same phone that has access to our email, bank, et cetera, right? So really kind of going around in the security kind of side of things there. I think this really kind of leads in well to a question that I was going to ask a little bit later, but who wants to kind of jump in on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly don't mind to jump in on that. I would say first and foremost, just like with any type of technology, you need to have a secured network or a secured area to start with. So when you think about, you're mentioning a consumable of a smart plug, right? Or a smart light plug from the question. I would say first and foremost is your wireless network that you have in your house. Do you have security turned on for that? And have you gone in and changed things like default password, default admin settings? It's amazing. Those are probably simple things, but I'm not sure that everyone knows that they should be doing those types of things. Are you monitoring the devices connected onto your network? So just just some of the basic, security aspects tied to having a wireless network come into play first and foremost. Once you get beyond that, then it's, ask questions, try to find technical specs or documentation pertaining to what that device has enabled from a security point of view. I know more and more security and consumable applications are getting into two-factor authentication. That's actually a really good thing as well. So you definitely need to do a little bit of research in there.
Update your software and update your password. That's what I heard there.
Yes, absolutely.
Emily, the last time we did this panel, I was really intrigued by some of the projects that you are working on. I think it was possibly out at LAX and in LA for some of the gearing up for basically the traffic during the upcoming Olympics, right? Can you talk about a little bit about that again?
Yeah, that particular project is, I think that there's a lot of funding challenges that public sector entities are having right now. So if anything, that's maybe a little less exciting, but I think that's a reality. When I'm looking at the other panelists, you guys all are mostly working for your companies, where my role at Parsons is working a lot with the public sector companies as well. Maybe Jerri's is a little bit more similar. And I think that there have been some really, it's not quite the question you asked, Ryan, but I think there's been some interesting challenges in understanding what does the transportation industry going to look like post-pandemic, and how do you continue to move projects forward? Well, a lot of the work that I do, you go out, whether you use technology or people, but you measure traffic. So one way that you do a KPI is you say, have we improved traffic operations? Have we reduced congestion? And those things, we have to use historic data at this point because the patterns were so interrupted. And my friends who are working more in transit are really struggling with this idea. We used to, or even those urban designers who wanted to get as many people together, where we used to say that the magic was in having a large number of people at a public event, or, getting as many people on buses or on rail as possible. Some of those questions from transportation, I think, are really being questioned right now in terms of not just how many people are willing to ride and use these things, but what is the health implications of that? Now, those are the lucky few who have the choice to take it or not. But the problem I think that we are facing as a society in some ways is a lot of times that funding comes in through the choice riders, where there's a lot of people who have no choices. So I would say some of the projects I'm working on are still really important in terms of integrating the one that you were talking about in LA. It's taking that idea of an airport and how it works with the adjacent cities. And so that idea, I know a lot of people, maybe a lot of the attendees too, are in the Denver area. You don't care. I don't care if the street where I have experienced, I've in a vehicle and hit another vehicle. One of us is hurt. I don't care if it's being coordinated by Denver or Wheat Ridge or Aurora. But right now, those systems can't talk to each other. And so a lot of the projects, that we are working on is not just for the vehicles to talk to each other, but for the different cities to work with each other. And then one particular project that I'm working on with the city of Las Vegas is how do we use new technology to provide internet into the homes? So using kind of maybe technology that was in the past used for freight vehicles to communicate with each other. How do we utilize that to allow families in homes that maybe are in areas that are economically challenged to receive discounted or free internet from public sector entities, even in partnership with others, and then get devices in the home, not just for kids, but for parents, for remote learning, so that they can also maybe get up to speed in a way that they haven't before in terms of the internet job security and other things that I think probably most of us who are both on the panel and who are in the audience, we have been in touch with and know how to work with technology. And we, are only so lucky to have problems with our current high-speed internet. So those are kinds of things as I'm working on the system of systems approach. Near and dear to my heart is still thinking about how do we help the most vulnerable populations, whether it's those who are walking, those with young kids, those who maybe are struggling understanding the world around them, not just people who have diagnosed mental illness, but I think there's a lot more anxiety. So we need to think about how to thoughtfully apply technology to make lives easier for everyone.
No, it makes a lot of sense. I think, what I heard there is there's a lot of interoperability that needs to happen between communities, both regionally and nationally as well. And, that's, something I think that the IoT community is still working on and struggling to get to, but I think over time it will start to come together, if that makes sense. So Thank you for that insight. Being kind of the times that we're in, and being in a pandemic, right? What effects has COVID really had on one, outside of funding and those types of things? Obviously, it's had an enormous effect on the types of projects and how projects are moving forward. But has it changed the landscape on really how any of you are moving forward with projects, or have you had to kind of change your thought process in those types of projects? And how has COVID really affected them? I don't know if I think Melissa, you had said you were maybe willing to chime in on this, at least on our little sheet. But.
You're gonna hold me to it. Yeah, so I think that our business, really, and specifically around the IoT project that we're on, it hasn't necessarily changed it, other than it's maybe added more urgency to the project in general. So when you think about physical access control and you think about commercial spaces and commercial buildings and how COVID's impacted that, it's really said it's going touchless. So I don't want to have to touch things to get in the door. I don't want to, spread COVID through that. So the physical security space is already pretty touchless, other than I have a plastic credential or a mobile credential. So I think there's more of a push into the mobile side. So I don't have to issue a credential to new people and they carry plastic and visitor management pieces where you're issuing a temporary credential. So I think more people, as we get back to whatever normal is going to look like, will have, more of a push into, do I have contactless and touchless access control in my facility? And then a lot of push around, are those integrated into different systems so we can take temperature or count how many people are in the room, or, look at occupancy levels and who was in there last for kind of a contact trace space. From a software side, it's a lot more about integration. On the hardware side, there's been a lot of asks from customers around, can you, and this isn't so much on the connected side, but more on the mechanical side, can you give me something on this door that will just allow people to have less physical interaction with it, whether I use my elbow or my foot or whatever. So sort of on two fronts, it's, how do you make the physical piece, physical door touchless from a, with my hands perspective, and then how do I make on the software end more of these systems integrated so I can hold myself accountable to all the pieces and the regulations that need to be met to sort of get back to normal as well. So I guess if I bring that all the way back around, there's more focus on touchless, contactless, but there's still a huge need around the IoT and connected device and physical security in general. So that
makes sense. Jerri, did you want to piggyback on anything there?
Well, yeah, for sure. And I'm also looking at one of the Q&As that came in, because it's kind of in the same vein. So there's a question asked about smart home burnout and are there too many vendor devices, too many apps? How can IoT become simpler? I think if you look at that coupled with what Melissa was just talking about, there's definitely lots of applications out there. There's definitely lots of devices that are in the consumer space or in the home. And I think the world is really ripe for partnerships to come together and connect up these things. Melissa, when you look at what Schlage is doing Allegion with locks, there could be an interesting play to tie into other security-based systems where there's cameras involved. Wouldn't it be cool if I drive up into my driveway, the camera notices that it's me, it's my house, and my door automatically unlocks. Ditto for any family members as such. So there's definitely ways to start connecting those things. And I think, as the space becomes more and more complex with more and more devices inside, I would naturally think that we'll start to see some of those partnerships and just some of those platforms start to integrate with other things so that you can take advantage of connecting those up and not having such a complex set of different apps for every single thing that might be in your house. Interested though, Melissa, I'd love to have you weigh in on that as well. I'm sorry, I just kind of threw that out there.
No, it's good. I was just gonna add to that there is a big push, specifically in the smart home space, that there's so many apps and so many devices. And if you're on the Google track, you buy their devices. If you're on the Apple track, and there's not a lot of sort of open systems where you can choose best of breed and what works best for you. There's an announcement at the end of last year where sort of the big 3 or 4, Apple, Amazon, Google, started an alliance called Connected Home over IP, or CHIP is the acronym. And there's a group of them plus other people in the industry looking at how would we do this? How do we sort of set an open standard for connected device in the home? And then how does that then fit in the commercial space? Because a lot of these folks are also sort of bleeding into the commercial space. And I think a lot of interesting things will come out of that. Us as a lock manufacturer is interesting because we have the ability to plug our lock into any of those ecosystems. Mm-hmm. But the more open it is, the easier it is for people to be part of those things. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that. But I agree, it's crowded and it's noisy. And I think in the question, they talk about smart home burnout. And I would totally agree with that for sure. People, although now that everybody's locked inside their house and they're like, what kind of home projects can I do? I would tell you they're out installing connected locks and thermostats and lights and everything else because they have time. So they're not burned out. I mean, they're burned out from the pandemic, and so they're back to smart home.
Sharon, I think, this, I wanted to kind of get a little bit of, insight from you. One, having those miles and miles of pipeline all across, the US and being in oil and gas, and, you're working kind of off the grid, so to speak, I would think, in a lot of those instances where, you're out in the middle of nowhere. There's probably no service, right, to get to those devices, and you're having to send somebody out there when something breaks down, and you kind of alluded to this, I think, in a previous answer. But how, talk about a little bit about kind of how you're overcoming some of those challenges and not having service in those areas, and what you're doing, like forward thinking, what do you think the future of IoT looks like for rural areas? Do you think it will be rolled out in 5 years, 10 years? How long is it going to take for something like that to be fully functional and fully deployed in rural America?
So, from a residential point of view, not really well versed from that area, but we're not dependent on the residential point of view for the network or the communication. There's a number of protocols out there that we can leverage to get data into the cloud from these rural areas. One of the things, that we're doing, and I just wanted to, a little bit from a different perspective, thinking about sensors and IoT data, you talked about our miles and miles of pipeline. We are doing a lot of work with satellite imagery. So that's another type of sensor. It's out up in space, right? And it's coming around the earth. And so we're looking at, how do we look at pipeline encroachment for our 40,000 miles of pipeline? Today you fly airplanes, and that can be very costly per mile. It's, processing it takes, a lot of time. So how do we look at, can we look at LiDAR? Can we look at some sort of imagery, or the spatial resolution of the imagery keeps of our satellites and the sensors keep reducing. So we can start seeing encroachment. The other thing that we can do is we can layer information from a number of different sensors, or where we're collecting data. And the other is to layer on cell phone signals into our satellite imagery. And so if we sort of see some things that look like vehicles or some structures being built on our right of way, we can then layer on cell phone data and start seeing where are people aggregating, in these areas over our pipelines. So there's a lot of opportunity just to think outside the box and kind of look at different ways that these so many different types of sensors that are out there can help us manage effectively our footprint, which is so broad and so wide in so many of these rural areas. We also have a methane initiative where we're using satellite imagery to identify methane leaks. And we're rolling that out not just for our company, but then if that information is available to the entire industry to help with sustainability and the environmental aspects as well of the business.
Sure, it makes a lot of sense. This question, I don't know if anybody wants to answer this question, but I'm going to ask it anyways. So, with data, data is really, as I see it, is really the driving force behind IoT, at least for the future of IoT. And, I think, with things like Facebook and Twitter and them being able to collect all of this data, and you had the Cambridge Analytica situation where they were, giving data away. And, I think it kind of comes down to the commoditization of data. And, how do you kind of foresee data in the future of IoT, and how will that change from the way things are today? Or how do you foresee things changing from the way they are today to, let's say, 3 to 5 years from now? There's a lot of legislation that's out there that could, and variables that could really change that. But, how, I guess, if you can kind of lean in a little bit and kind of give maybe some line of sight as to how some of your organizations are kind of preparing for that down the road. Anybody want to answer that one?
I can.
Okay.
So completely agree with the comment you made at the beginning, that the real value of IoT is in the data. It's easier to connect to things, and that's great, but to the organization, but also to the consumer, the value's in the data. And I'm going to sort of go one way, and I'll come back to your specific question. And really, it's about how you provide value. So Jerry's example of my doorbell's connected to my lock. When I pull in my driveway, it knows it's me, whether that's because my phone tells them that it is based on the communication or whatever. It's because I'm connected to my doorbell, which has a camera. The value in that is that those two things talk together, and that we can drive the partnership. They're connected, and then we add the value of making it easier and seamless. And so it's always about what are you doing with the data to make it easier for the consumer. And I think that allows the consumer to understand that you're not using their PII, you're really just using sort of their analytics to make their life easier. So I think when people see that, there's less sensitivity maybe about, well, you just want my data because you want to resell it. And being really upfront about what you're using the data for as the organization, why, and how, I think also makes people feel more comfortable. Our organization's very focused on data privacy. We have a chief data privacy officer who's very focused on making sure all of our products run through a specific process. Where's the data going? What's in it? Where is it coming back? Where is it hitting? Very detailed integration or agreements with partners, et cetera, in the way that we go to market in those things as well. So that's kind of what we're doing, and sort of maybe some examples of how data adds value. And I think maybe allows the comfort level to kind of be driven there. Somebody else jump.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. It's interesting that you asked that question, Ryan, because this morning on the way into work, I was listening to an interview on the radio, and it was about a person from a college weighing in on remote learning versus the colleges opening and closing because of COVID being detected in the dorms. And they were trying to get information relative to how many people and where were the hot spots within the dorm community, and the college hadn't released it. So at the point that the person was being interviewed, they have since released the information, but the person was making the point that there's a way to release certain data without, telling any of the privacy details as to who was impacted or what room or what specific from a dorm point of view. And so I think when you look at some of these data privacy things, it's all about making sure that you're not exposing any of the personal information or anything that would identify some where the source of that data originated from, or what's, tying those pieces together. It's really about making sure that that's protected, yet there are ways to still provide the value to somebody relative to the information that they're trying to get, so that they can do something perhaps differently or more impactful. So there's definitely ways to address that, but I think there's still a lot of work to be done. Certainly there's standards like GDPR and things like that are taking place. California has different legislation. And so it varies by state, it varies by country. I think it's definitely things that have to be taken into consideration depending on the application and what it is you're doing. But lots more work to be done on that still.
Yeah,
Well, and
I could go ahead, Emily. Yeah, sorry.
No, I mean, as I've been thinking, as everyone's been talking, it just makes me, I think about a lot of things with data. First of all, I think we don't fully understand what it is. I have this kind of analogy of, data is like molecules. Molecules come together and they make sidewalks. They make asphalt that then can make sidewalks, or concrete to make sidewalks. Molecules also can come together and make whales, right? But you can't take whales and finish a mile of missing sidewalk. So often we take this word data and it means everything and nothing. Similar almost to the term sustainability and things like that. And so the problem that I see is what is important? Who is it important for? I used to hear a lot about this idea of monetization of data. And I guess for me, I've even though I'm in the private sector, I still think, a lot of my work is public sector, and I consider myself in the profession I am in as being a public servant. And I think a lot of transportation data, the data are the people who are riding around. And if anything, the city should be very mindful, or the public sector entities, on what that data is. And then I struggle sometimes in the fact that people use this. The reason why I brought the definitions of data up is that people then, especially who are trying to make money on it, are trying to sell things that maybe aren't theirs to sell. And I'm not saying PII, let's take that out of it. Let's not say that anyone could be identified. But I do know that there's aggregators who take on data, right? There's companies that sell sensors to public sector, but then they also sell that same data to a private sector who then aggregates the data, tries to put in some insights, and then sells it back to the public sector entity again. Now, is that good or is that bad? You know, is there more value to it because there's other data sources? Maybe. But the problem, again, is that no one understands what the data is, right? What that definition is. And now public sector entities are going to make decisions saying, hey, let's spend more money on this aggregator of data rather than the sensors themselves. But no one is drawing the correlation that a huge component of the truth part of the sensors are the sensors that the public sector entities are buying. So if now people make financial decisions to not buy those sensors, then the data that people are going to be using to make decisions won't be as rich of a data set, but no one will kind of know, right, that they're accidentally taking whales and, you know, adding miles of freeway. So I think that we have an issue with definitions, and we have an over reliance or almost like a feeding frenzy. I don't mean to do a marine kind of analogies, but I guess I am, you know, in terms of trying to make money on it versus understanding what it is and the value and kind of tying back those sources so that we don't accidentally untether ourselves to the data that makes the most sense. So it's not really answering your question, but I was thinking about what Melissa and Jerri and everyone's saying. And as much as we want life to be convenient and we want life to be efficient, we want some truth to what we're making decisions on.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, giving up your data is it's twofold, right? We get the convenience of all of these fun things that we get to interact with every single day. However, you know, we have to give our data up for that, you know, which is kind of, could be, you know, depending on who you are and what you're doing with the data, you know, it could be an invasion of privacy. So I totally get that. So there is, I think, a give and take there as well, you know, which is really interesting. Looking at the clock, we've got about 8 minutes left, and, you know, wanted to kind of leave, you know, the last few minutes, you know, for some questions from the attendees, if there's anybody out there that wanted to kind of chime in a little bit, and then, you know, talk about maybe some closing remarks from any of you, just kind of, you know, where do you see IoT as it is today, kind of like forward thinking 5 years from now, 10 years from now, where is that going to lie? You know, where's the innovation going to come from? What's driving that? What's going to really drive and increase that innovation within IoT? And, you know, what is that next big thing, right? What is that next big product that you're seeing out there that could potentially be, you know, the next great startup here in Denver?
So I'd like to take a portion of that, and to piggyback off of what Emily was and everybody in the panel was talking about, from a data perspective, right? The data comes from the sensors. They come from this, our technology, that what we can now monitor with sensors is mind-boggling. And I want to echo that, you know, we have so many choices out there from a sensor standpoint, and we get all of this data, right? And so we look at, you know, what we're doing at DCP today before we even roll out any IoT sensors. We bring in 7 billion data points a day. And so what do we do with that? And I think there's a really big opportunity to then turn for a kind of an orchestration of all that data. You have to bring it all together and sync it up, so you can then start gaining insights from that. And we can get a whole bunch of data, but unless we have the use cases and we know what our goals are and what we're trying to solve, and we have the sensor data, now there's a whole in-between area where there's a lot of really small players in what I call the platform, or the aggregation of the data. And how do we turn that data into information? And then how do we turn that into knowledge? So we're trying to empower people to make better decisions, whether it's on the commercial side or the industrial side, right? We want better information for better decision making, and that world of the platforms, the analysis, the orchestration of all of this time series data. So it's a bunch of time series data, and that is an area that is really, really challenging. And from a venture standpoint, looking at the landscape of what's available out there, there are some solutions. But a lot of it is trying to fit round peg into a square hole from that standpoint. So from a user and someone who wants to make decisions off of this sensor data, I see that as a real opportunity for the future as far as a marketplace.
No, that's, I love the data stuff. Let's see. We've got one, not a question, just a comment and a great story. Here, I'll put this in the chat for everybody.
I think that I just really hope that we kind of don't go into the prisoner's dilemma in a lot of stuff we do, where everyone's fighting over, the vertical and the horizontal of what the data is. We lose track of, like what Sharon was saying, who is it for and how do we make our lives better? I certainly hope that we also take into account the people who who we're losing as part of the public discourse because we are doing so much around technology with the pandemic, and those who still don't have devices that are connected to the internet. So I would hope that we still take those voices into consideration and we think thoughtfully about that. And then I really hope that we try to find that win-win situation where we can utilize standards and think about how do we share things and create situations maybe where not everybody's, becoming the unicorns and the multimillionaires, but are we creating an environment for the startups and for others to, show additional insights and then be able to continue to do that. I think we have value. I find a lot of value when I work with those who are public in private sector, in small companies, medium-sized, large companies. And I hope we value diversity and differences of opinion in every way, shape, and form.
Thank you for that, Emily.
Yeah, I would probably just chime in that I think five years to maybe 10 years out. First of all, we won't be doing a panel on IoT. There's going to be so many things that are already connected that we won't be using the term IoT, right? So it's going to continue. I think that there are going to be more and more innovations from smaller startups where people are coming up with ideas that really do make a difference, an impactful difference in people's lives and how they live in their environment, in their surroundings. I am excited about those. I think those kinds of things can be really quite interesting. So really look forward to seeing what those young inventors come out with in the next couple of years that really make that big difference.
No, I tend to agree, and thank you so much, all four of you, for all of your insight. And this is being in Denver and being a part of the Internet of Things community here. It's such a pleasure to be able to kind of have a conversation with thought leaders like yourselves, and an all women's panel in IoT. You don't really get that very often as well, and so. Genuinely want to thank you all for doing this for the community here. And, with that, without further ado, I think, we'll kind of cut it short. I don't see any other questions, and just want to say thank you to everybody who attended, and hopefully you're got a little bit of value out of this, and feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and connect with the panelists on LinkedIn. And, we truly support the startup community here, and that's what it's all about. A startup to me means innovation, and building that community here in Denver is something that I'm very passionate about and an advocate for. So thank you all for attending, and thank you, Melissa and Emily and Sharon and Jerri, for all the leadership that you provide here in the community.
Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ryan.
All right, thank you, everybody. Take care now. Bye.
Bye, everyone.